These were brought to council way back in 2016, and they haven't changed. And to be honest, I think about them almost every day and think about how all the actions we're doing need to align with these principles. And again, our number one priority is to protect the long-term rental stock for Vancouverites. So everything we do, we're trying to keep that in mind. Second, of course, not really second, but is making sure that dwelling units are safe. People staying in these units need to be safe. And again, we found all sorts of scenarios where they aren't, and we're working hard to address those, and we have been addressing them. Neighborhood fit. So again, this speaks to really stratas and landlords and communities defining what is appropriate for them as with respect to short-term rentals. Enabling supplemental income. I talked about the affordability challenges and the tourism industry. Regulatory equity. This again was based on feedback we had from our hotel and tourism consultation around making sure that things like taxation were put in place to create equity in the industry. And finally, again, compliance. We had 6,600 listings. We knew we didn't know anything about them. Now we know a lot about them. And we are happy to have put in place systems to try to encourage compliance. And I think the data coming up will talk to that a bit more.
Yeah, I'm a numbers guy. I like this. I think this is a cool slide. I don't know if you can see that in the back there.
I can read a couple key numbers there. So what we've been doing, like I mentioned earlier, we had this data scraper. It's a third party that comes in and helps us understand the market. So we've been tracking, again, how many active units listed in Vancouver, and you'll see from 2016, June of 2016, if you can't read them all, I'll read the numbers out for you, but we started about 5,300 and grew to about that 6,600 by April of this year. It was late March, early April of this year, just before we implemented our regulations. And I'm happy to say that in September, when we went live fully, we were down to 3,700 active listings. That number dropped dramatically for two primary reasons. One, as part of our memorandum of understanding with Airbnb, they agreed to remove all listings that did not have a license number posted in their listing. So they removed, it was 2,500 listings that came down. We also saw, because we were actively tracking from April to September, a number of listings, about 660 that either delisted or converted to be long-term rentals. And again, I should have said how we consider short-term rentals per our zoning and development bylaw is 30 days or less as a short-term rental. So when we say converted to long-term rental, we saw that they were advertising for 30 days or more. So some other numbers to maybe flag. So that was a 43, I think it's 43%, rounded up to 43% drop in listings from April until September. In that time, we issued over 2,600 licenses. So that represents about a 70% uptake. We've looked around the world, again, a big part of this project is to continue to monitor how other cities around the world are dealing with this situation, and we think that's probably the biggest uptake we've seen anywhere in the world at Go Live, to have a 70% compliance rate. That said, and I will talk about this, just because a license is issued doesn't mean it's been issued appropriately. So we'll talk about some of those challenges with enforcement as well. We also are checking to see how many are listing an entire unit or sharing a unit, and we've seen a pretty steady state across over time. About 70% of those units advertised are the entire unit, and about 30% are either a private bedroom or a shared unit. And we're also tracking to see if operators are listing more than one or not, because that's another flag for us around whether there's a commercial operation happening or not. And happy to say, again, the operators listing only one has stayed pretty steady at about 80% and change. And the number operating more than 10 has been dropping. But again, those are the people that we are looking into closely and we're pursuing enforcement against. And the final piece we look at is market share, because we know that Airbnb has been very cooperative and supportive in moving forward with this memorandum of understanding and trying to ensure compliance with the city's bylaws. And we want to monitor how the market changes as a result. So we've seen Airbnb stay steady at 80+% over the last 2 years. Expedia, same, pretty steady at about 8 to 10%. And then there's some other operators out there that have a bit of the rest of the market. Again, these aren't, I should say too, these aren't necessarily scientific numbers. There is a bit of an art element to data scraping, but it is consistent, and it is the best data we have and the best data that other cities around the world have as well. We're not using any tool that is substandard to what other cities are using to monitor their short-term rental activity. What are we up to now? So first and foremost is we're prioritizing enforcement. I can safely say we are very busy with that activity right now. There are lots of folks to enforce against. There are lots of listings that still do not have a license number. So that's one first place to start. Second, folks who obtained a license weren't entirely truthful with us. They've misrepresented themselves, or they're misusing their license and perhaps using a license in multiple listings. So those are the other folks that we're prioritizing enforcement against. And of course, any unsafe operation, any unsafe dwelling unit that comes to our attention, we pursue enforcement against them as well, and the commercial operators continue to be a priority. We rely really heavily too. I mean, we have a number of data sources, but I want to really flag again 311. It's the call-in, Van Connect, an app based on your phone, are really great ways for us to understand where there is a suspected short-term rental that needs to be looked at by our team. We really need an address and a link. So if you, as Stratas, would like to report or share any information with us, we'd really encourage you to do that, to use our tools to get the information into the system. We have a lot of people on social media who are actively reporting or advising on short-term rental activity, which is helpful and interesting to see, but it doesn't really help us in that we can't feed that data into our channel and we can't officially investigate it. So we'd encourage you, or if you know of anyone reporting information on Twitter, to really report it through one of our official channels, 311 or Van Connect. We are hoping to really continue to build on our platform and partnerships, working with Expedia on a platform partnership and further refinement on our Airbnb partnership as well. And we also want to talk about a Strata partnership and what that looks like. Again, you are closer to the action. You really know what's happening on the ground in your buildings, and you also have the ability to define what you want short-term rentals to look like in your building. But we want to hear from you and hear your ideas on how we could engage further. We want to talk about how we could look to restrict licenses being issued in a building if a strata bylaw prohibits it. We want to talk about how we could support you in enforcement if short-term rentals are occurring. I'm hoping we can take this offline, have an ongoing conversation with FSR as a start, and how we could engage in some work to start strengthening our partnership, to engage more, to ensure that we are supporting you in your efforts as well. And finally, I'd say, the data refinement, like I said, it's the core of our work. It's a very sophisticated tool that we're leaning on daily to drive our enforcement, and we're going to continue to refine it and use it on a daily basis. And also our program. I mentioned Berlin, but really every city in the world that has decided to take an approach to regulate short-term rentals has found that they don't get it 100% the first time. And I don't think we're going to be any different. I think we're off to a really good start. I think we've had some great success early on. And I think we're going to continue to learn. We're going to continue to see how the industry evolves, how individuals decide to find clever ways around our system, because we know they will, and we know they are all throughout the world. And we're going to continue to adapt our program accordingly.
That's really interesting. I thought it was interesting how dominant Airbnb was. I thought VRBO was going to have a greater presence, but really, once you've reached an agreement with them, that's made the largest impact overall.